Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to this online public meeting as part of our consultation on Thames Vision 2050. My name is Robin Mortimer. I'm Chief Executive of the Port of London Authority, and it's very good to be able to welcome you. Obviously, often previously would have done these sessions in person, but it often is easier for people to join online. You've told us from previous events. It also has the advantage, I'm actually currently coming to the end of a period of COVID, so I would be having to work from home anyway. So it's fortunately sort of coincides with that, and I can therefore be here, which I couldn't be if it was an in-person meeting. It's a key moment for us this. So we've been working with a lot of you over the last 2 years in developing Thames Vision 2050. And so today will be an opportunity to set out a bit of detail of what we have published. The session is being recorded, so just to make you aware of that. And also you have an opportunity to ask questions as we go throughout the whole meeting using the Q&A tab on Zoom, which I'm sure all of you will be familiar with. So if you want to ask a question, just put it in the Q&A at any point, and we'll come to the questions at the end of the opening presentation. I will at that point be joined by a number of colleagues from within the PLA, and I'll introduce the panel when we get to that point, and we'll be fielding your questions together at the end of the presentation. I should say, of course, that there's often a follow-up to these events, and there's bound to be sort of points that you raise and ideas that you come forward with in response to what you see, which won't have a sort of an immediate instant answer. And that's really very much the point of this. It is a consultation event, and we're looking forward to hearing views and thoughts, as well as being able to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to run through some slides now to give you an overview. The document is, of course, on the PLA's website, and you can access it there and see all the detail for yourself. But here's a summary of some of the key points. Now, the starting point for developing the Thames Vision is that we as a trust port inherit a very simple guiding purpose, which is very helpful when we think about the future of the Thames, because our role is essentially to pass the Thames on to future generations in a better condition than we inherited it. And that very broad sort of value and commitment is at the heart of our Thames Vision 2050. It means it's about better. We're trying to create a better river for the future, for future river users, and for the future country as a whole. And that is the sort of guiding philosophy behind the whole project. Next slide, please. So in developing the proposals which we set out, we've pulled together quite a lot of evidence and information as a basis for the document. So it's not just a sort of set of proposals which come from nothing. It's very much based upon an evidence base. And the key pieces of evidence which we pulled together are set out here. So first of all, we commissioned a significant trade forecast out to 2050, which was carried out by Oxford Economics, and the details of that is available. And that piece of work was to look at how the port economy would fare, both compared to competitor ports around the UK, but also in the context of a UK economy and a global economy which needs to decarbonise. And I'll come on and say a bit more about net zero and decarbonisation. So that port trade forecast is a sort of key part of the evidence base. Secondly, we did a study working with ARA, looking at the future of passenger travel, looking in the context of passenger travel in general in London and the South East, and specifically how that could develop on the river and continue to make better use of the river. We looked at sports participation, both what's currently happening in terms of activities on the river and the potential for future growth. We also carried out a public opinion survey to try and understand better what local residents and local visitors to the Thames see it like, just to try and gather some understanding of the perceptions of the river. We had a lively public engagement around the first draft of our ideas, so gathered input from many of you. We also commissioned a panel of expert advisors, academics, to help guide our thinking. And we did a review of all the sort of relevant policies, national, regional, London, sectoral, to position ourselves within all of those other strategies. So taken together, that's a pretty big body of evidence which we've pulled together, and is the basis of what we've come up with in the following slides. So this slide, which I'll build up, basically kind of draws out the key themes onto one single slide. So first of all, we had to decide how to present the Thames, if you like, and to sort of how do we split up all the things which the Thames provides. And we've drawn it together into three broad headings. The first of those is what we call trading Thames. So that's the role the river plays as the number one net zero trading hub for the UK. It is the UK's biggest port. It is the UK's busiest inland waterway. And so that fundamental economic role is very much at the centre of how the Thames will continue to be used for the next generation. Second, destination Thames. So this pulls together all the ways in which the river plays a role in the tourism economy, in moving people around as a passenger transport conduit, as a highway, and as a place to actively enjoy for sports and recreation. So that's sort of summed up in those words there, a place to live, visit, play and enjoy. And then thirdly, the natural Thames. So the role of the river as a provider of ecosystem services, to use the technical jargon, clean air, water and land supporting diverse wildlife. So those are three ways of thinking about the functions that the River Thames plays in our culture and our society and our environment. Then we looked at, okay, so those are the sort of broad themes. What do we need to focus on? What are the priorities for action and to sort of gather all of our efforts together? And we've come up with 5. The first of those is safety. And this is, of course, the core responsibility for the PLA. It's our core statutory purpose. And it underpins everything else. If you think about all those roles the river plays, none of it can happen without safety being paramount. And so this is something which we kind of see as a core value, but also something which we should continually work on to improve. So it's not a static thing, it's something which we need to invest in and continue to improve across those themes. The second, net zero. So we make no bones about the fact that we as the PLA very much adhere to the idea that we are facing a climate emergency and that urgent action is needed to mitigate climate change by reducing emissions. And the Thames has got a very important part to play in that as part of the wider UK efforts to transition the economy. And I'll come on to say more about that through the rest of the presentation. Thirdly, resilience. And this is resilience in all its different forms. So firstly, climate resilience to more extreme weather events, to rising sea levels and all the climate impacts which we can model. Resilience to economic shocks. We are seeing those very much at the moment with the situation in the war in Ukraine. Obviously has an immediate impact upon trade flows. So are we resilient to the ups and downs of the economy? Resilient to future pandemics and other sort of social shocks. So I think this is an issue, resilience, which has really come to the fore through the pandemic. And many organisations are now grappling with what does it mean to be more resilient to shock in a way which perhaps we hadn't been as focused on pre-pandemic. Fourthly, technological change. Now, clearly, this has been a sort of factor affecting the River Thames over the last 200 years. And if you look back over the last 30 years, there's been a huge amount of technological change affecting the river. The introduction of AIS and other safety systems, just one example. So we're looking forward and saying, well, what's the next generation of that change and how will that affect us? And how do we need to respond to that to remain relevant and playing our part in the economy? And finally, access and inclusion. So it's true to say that the Thames at the moment is not as representative of the communities it serves as it could be, whether that's in terms of employment or in terms of participation in sports. And so again, cutting across all those themes, access and inclusion will be part of our Thames Vision 2050. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. Now I'll delve into some of those areas in a bit more detail. Next one, please. Thanks, Theo. So the trading at Thames. As I said, the Thames is the country's largest port. The Port of London overtook the Humber in 2019 to regain that top spot as the UK's biggest port, central to supply chains across London and the southeast. And it's also increasingly playing a role in the transportation of light freight into central London. So the Thames for the last 30, 40 years in terms of inland freight has mainly been about moving bulk materials, but we're seeing a number of projects looking at the expansion of the light freight market into central London. Now, all of that needs to be done at the same time as switching to net zero operations. And the chart on the right of the slide there tries to map out broadly what that could mean for port trade over the next 30 years. And without going into every single detail of that slide, what it essentially shows is that we envisage port trade continuing to grow. So the overall volume of trade is likely to go up in the response to consumer demand and the growth in the economy. But the composition of the trade coming into the Port of London is likely to change, in particular, and most obviously, with the switch away from fossil fuels to alternative fuels, which will reduce the current volumes of fossil fuel coming into Thames terminals in order to achieve that transition. And in order to achieve that, of course, we need a huge change in technology, particularly in relation to alternative modes of transport to replace the current reliance on fossil fuel. So overall, that Trading Thames incorporates both the role the river plays and that transition to net zero. Next slide, please. Destination Thames. So many of the people on this call, looking at the list of people who are attending, are involved in this aspect of the river in one way or another, whether working in sports and recreation, culture, passenger transport. And we know that there is a huge potential for this river, iconic as it is as a national asset, to play a bigger part in that tourism economy and in the passenger transport economy, and to be more used for sporting and leisure activities. And so that's very much the goal of this part of the vision, is to realise that potential. And the final point there, as I said earlier, is it also needs to be not just more people, but people representative of the full range of diversity in the communities we serve. And that's very much a focus for one of the projects I'll talk about later, to try and improve that diversity of the offer of Destination Thames. Next slide, please. The natural Thames. So the river will be the cleanest it's been in generations when Tideway Tunnel starts operating in 2025-26. That is a hugely exciting development for the river in the sense of dealing with the current problem of sewage overflows, which of course is problematic from a wide range of views. So that moment of that project going live is an opportunity, I think, to engage the public in the fact that the river will be cleaner than it has been for many generations, and getting people to understand that it does support a huge amount of diversity of wildlife already. So we have 125 fish species in the river, a huge number of sightings of seals, and yet the public perception from our public opinion survey was that the river was dirty. One of the most striking points of the feedback that we got when we did the Mori opinion poll was that people perceived the river to be polluted. And I suspect part of that is because of the sewage issue, which we absolutely must address. And part of it, I suspect, is to do with a historical perspective of the River Thames as not being as supportive of wildlife, etc., as it is. So there's a real job to be done there to reconnect people to the clean river, which we will soon have. Now, of course, as well as providing a haven for wildlife, the Thames plays an important part in providing the ecosystem services that we rely upon, whether that's flood defences, clean air, capturing carbon as a sequestration project, and that's very much part of the work which we'll be doing, looking at the potential of the river in those areas as well. And of course, there is also a big join up here with other parts of these three themes very much go together. Part of being able to market Destination Thames is being able to demonstrate the cleanliness of it as part of the offer of the river. Thanks very much. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a number of kind of cross-cutting themes. Safety, already mentioned, essential foundation for greater river use. The net zero challenge, responding to the climate change emergency, supporting sustainable economic growth. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it does mean a switch away from fossil fuels on the river, and this is going to be a challenging thing for the marine environment to achieve. We know that in some other parts of the transport infrastructure, it's more obvious what needs to happen on the roads. The transition away from diesel cars to electric is very evident. On the river, it's likely to be a combination of technologies. Hydrogen will need to play its part. Electrical powered vessels will play their part. In the interim, we will need to rely upon sustainable biodiesels to switch towards net zero. So the whole range of technologies will need to be brought together to achieve that. Of course, we also need to think about the role the river can play supporting the wider transport decarbonisation. So shifting goods from the roads where there's congestion onto what we call the low carbon inland highway, it makes sense. If we can achieve that using zero carbon vessels, then we get a win-win for tackling congestion on the roads and supporting decarbonisation. As I mentioned earlier, resilience, developing the infrastructure systems and habitats that are robust to future events, including the impact of climate change. And a part of that is about scale. And one of the connections I think is important is to think about the value and the importance of economic growth in the context of resilience. One of the advantages that obviously Western wealthy nations have in terms of climate resilience is that we are basically wealthier. And the growth of our terminals and the economic success of our terminals will enable us to invest in the infrastructure that's needed to make us resilient. So I think it's important not to sometimes see some of these things as trade-offs, that they are very much supporting each other. The economic growth agenda supports resilience if it's done in the right way. Technological change I've talked about already, fuels and infrastructure, ship and port technology. We will gradually, I think, see the potential for automation over the period we're looking at. Now, I think it's unlikely we'll see 400-metre container ships travelling up the Thames with nobody on them anytime soon. However, there are already many examples around the world of autonomous vessels at smaller scale, and we will no doubt see the potential for that technology to grow, and we need to be able to respond to that and be prepared for that change over this period. And as I said, access and inclusion, delivering more equitable access to river opportunities. This is partly about the diversity of participation in jobs and sport. It's also about access to the river itself. And one thing which we're looking at, for example, is how do we facilitate safe access to areas of the foreshore, which people already do in some cases access, in a way which makes people aware of the safety risks, but nevertheless able to enjoy those sort of spaces. So that's one of the sort of issues which we'll be looking at under that heading. Now, the next slide just captures a few of the actions which flow from those priorities. Now, you can see all of these in the document itself. There are over 40 proposed actions set out, not all of which I should say are just for the PLA. One of the important messages from the work we've done on the vision is that a huge amount of the goals that we're trying to achieve can only be done through a lot of organisations working together in partnership. So many of these actions are not just about the PLA. So some of these actions are, I'll just give you a flavour here, creating a Thames net zero coalition. So there is under the United Nations a set of groupings that you can sign up to as businesses and organisations to be part of a net zero coalition, and we're creating a sort of subset of that for the Thames, and we've already got quite a number of organisations, big companies and other organisations signed up to be part of that to try and drive this change that we need to see on the river. A second example in relation to technology is that the PLA is developing a new marine control centre. We're planning to have this operational by 2024, investing in new technology to be ready for more autonomy and to be at the cutting edge of vessel traffic systems and VTS management. As I say, we are the biggest port in the UK, and we need to be thinking as a global port and investing accordingly. A third area is the targets around air quality. I think it's really important that as we focus on climate change and net zero in the sense of net zero carbon, we also absolutely keep our sights on the air quality challenge locally in London. And we have an existing air quality strategy, with a number of actions set out in that, and that absolutely will continue to be a focus for us. In relation to resilience, continuing the development of the Thames Estuary 2100 programme. So this is led by the Environment Agency, looking at the future of flood defences and the Thames barrier, and obviously doing that in conjunction with looking at navigation on the river, key part of our resilience response of the Thames. I mentioned earlier that we have a programme specifically to look at getting more participation in sport and activities on the river. This is called the Active Thames programme. And one of the key focus points for that will be developing greater access and inclusion, as well as increasing participation more generally. And then two more things to mention. One is supporting the development of a Thames boatyard or shipyard. Anybody involved in the recreational businesses on the river or passenger transport knows that we absolutely need to have a more local maintenance facility on the Thames as an underpinning for future growth of the market. And that's something which we've been working with the GLA on at a site in East London. And finally, scoping the potential for a further major Thames or riverside event. As I said earlier, one of the findings from the public opinion survey was a sort of a lack of awareness really of the potential that the River Thames has and its cleanliness and so on. So I think something which kind of gathers people together to make them understand better the potential for the river would be a good step forward, and we're going to take a look at that. So that's a little bit of a snapshot. There's a lot more detail which is in the document itself. That's to give you a bit of a flavour. What are we going to do with this? So the plan is to obviously to carry through this consultation period and then publish a final version, and to set out not just the goals, but the actions and how we're going to achieve those actions and which partners need to come together to do that. We will then be having a process to review and refresh that. So we will, as we've done previously, update every 5 years the refresh. We'll report on progress every year. Every 2 years we'll do a big progress report, and every year we'll do a shorter update. And we'll also track the progress using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework, so that we can see how we're playing into those broad agendas set out in the UN SDGs. We've got some further events coming up. I'm just going to go to the next slide, please. So we've got, we're looking for views on all of the things set out. So not just the framework, but the themes and the areas for action. The consultation runs till the end of April, and you can feedback via survey, email or post. More details there on the PLA website, pla.co.uk/Thames Vision. And the next slide tells you about other events. So we've got a public meeting coming up in person next week, the 29th of March at London Rowing Club. Everybody's very welcome to come and attend that. We've also got a drop-in session at the Museum of London Docklands on the 19th of April. And finally, this is a sort of a slight add-on, this slide really, because it's a little bit separate from the Thames Vision 2050. But just to remind you that we currently have a major exhibition which the PLA has helped to fund at the Museum of London Docklands called London Port City. It's still running at the museum until the 8th of May, which draws on the huge PLA archive to bring to life the history of the Port of London and the River Thames. But it also tries to make some of these connections to the future. So it sort of supports some of the thinking we've been doing around Thames Vision 2050, trying to draw together the great historical legacy which we all love and enjoy about the Thames with its future potential. So that would, if you want to kind of bring some of this to life, I really recommend going and seeing the exhibition if you haven't had a chance to already. And that was what I wanted to cover. So I think now I see we've had quite a few questions come in already. I haven't been able to read them as I've gone along, but I've seen a few pop up on the screen. So if I can now invite colleagues from the PLA to take themselves off of to put their cameras on, and I will now introduce everybody. So joining, hopefully you can see everybody now. We've got James Trimmer, who is the Director of Planning and Environment. Sorry, Director of Planning and Development, I beg your pardon. Veronica Chan, who is our Environment Team Expert on Air Quality and Net Zero. Stephen Clapperton, who is Director of Sustainable Marine Operations. Jenny Cooper, who is our head of our sports and engagement and recreation team, and has led a lot of the work feeding into the Thames Vision. We've got Catherine Spain from our Harbour Masters team, Alistair Gale, Director of Corporate Affairs, and to introduce you to a new member of the team, Lydia Hutchinson, who just joined us. He's our Marine Manager, who you'll be seeing more of, who's going to be working on many of our projects from a marine perspective. So we will attempt to answer your questions, and if not, to follow up on them afterwards. So let's just go to the Q&A box. So the first question from Aaron Sriskanda, I hope I could pronounce that correctly. A great roadmap out to the future, thanks very much. Will costs for river users exceed underlying annual inflationary changes in order to manage this transition? You're right, I think you're asking me to comment on future PLA charges there, are you? Look, I think we tend to look very carefully at every single year at our charges to make sure that we stay competitive. So the PLA obviously charges for riverworks licenses, for pilotage and other services, and for conservancy. And over the last few years, we've typically kept our prices at or below inflation. We have invested more in pilotage because of the increase in demand, and we have on one occasion put our pilotage costs up by slightly over inflation. But our general approach will be to avoid doing that. But I think your question sort of gets at a broader point, which is, will we need to invest in some of this change? And the answer is absolutely yes. And if you think about the transition to net zero in particular, it's certainly going to have costs attached to it. But I think it's incumbent on all of us working in quasi-public organisations to try and achieve that in the most cost-effective way we can, and to avoid putting additional costs onto customers if possible. So that's a sort of slightly not quite ducking the question, but that is as much as I can say, really. We will avoid, if possible, putting charges up more than we have to, is the basic answer. Did anybody else want to come in on that? Let's go to the next question then. So where will the new Marine Control Centre be located? Graham Humphrey asked. So we're looking essentially at Gravesend, our main headquarters, as the most likely core site. That's where the majority of the river is currently, of the estuary in the river is currently overseen from. So that's essentially where we're looking at. Anything else to add on that? Stephen, did you want to say anything about the Marine Transformation Project?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I guess just to note that it's a very, very early stage for this project. As Robin said, Gravesend is where our main marine operational base is currently. So we're shortly going to be appointing architects to kick off the project, and following the appointment of the architects, that's when we'll start the engagement with the local authority from a planning perspective.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Dwight, from Tarmac. As a major trade user of the Thames, and bearing in mind what we've heard, where does the future of trade on the river now sit in the PLA's priority list? Well, it's the first of our three themes, I suppose, is the first thing I'd say. I mean, we are under no illusions of the fact that as the biggest port in the UK, we need to absolutely maintain our position as a trading hub, because it's central to the London and the UK economy, and everything we do is very much has that in mind. It's also, of course, true to say that for the PLA, the vast majority of our revenue comes from the trading Thames. So an awful lot of our achievement of all the goals relies upon having a successful Thames economy. So in both those senses, it's absolutely central. I suppose maybe what your question is getting at is does the fact that we've also got broader objectives such as net zero and supporting sport and recreation mean that we're sort of taking our eye off the ball in terms of trade and freight? I don't think so, but I think we do need to see it alongside other objectives, and that's really the sort of the philosophy of this vision. I think one of the things I might just say as an aside on that is that, in a way, I think this vision is slightly more complicated than the last one. I think the first time round, the Thames vision was kind of saying, look, we want more of lots of things. We want more trade, we want more passengers, we want more people doing sport. And we still believe that, but we're trying to join some of these themes up a bit more coherently, and also look at some of the kind of cross-cutting challenges a bit harder, like climate change and net zero. So absolutely, trade is still central, but we need to join up with these other initiatives as well.
Is there something I can add to that, please?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks. I think what I'd like to add to that is that yes, trade's vital, but I think the context of that is that it's vital for us to help you to increase your trade. And clearly in the aggregates market that Tarmac are in, London is by far the largest port in the UK, obviously because of the massive market of London. And our role, and my role particularly now in terms of development and through the vision, is actually to enable you to reach the river's full potential for your trade and for your markets. So that includes into the port, and also then up into London, and the protection of wharves and the reactivation of wharves in central London, in order then, as Robin says, that we can start looking at how we deal with net zero, congestion, and those other issues that are facing London now. So it's vital for the vision, and it's vital for us to help you to actually achieve the vision.
Thanks very much, Jim. The next question is from Jeff Hetherington, which is asking about public access to the river. What practical steps are the PLA taking, actively helping or supporting voluntary groups trying to achieve that aim of access to the river, e.g. Dartford and Crayford Creek Restoration Trust and Northfleet Harbour Restoration Trust? I think I might ask Jim to
me again.
Yes, please,
and of course, through the Environment Fund awards that we made last year, of course, some money was allocated in terms of improvements to Crayford Creek. So yes, we consider that they're important. The tributaries are important, and how we can help that. Again, as Robin says, it needs to be within the context of our duties as a whole. But clearly, one of the aims of the vision is getting people to enjoy the river. And I think that's as important, if not more important, in the estuary as it is in London. And clearly the creeks and Swanscombe and the rest is important in that. So we're here, the planning development team is here through the vision analysis team, in order to listen to what you're saying to help you. But yes, it's an essential part.
If I could just follow up on that. Yeah, Jim's picked up already on the environmental grant scheme helping volunteering. I think the exhibition that you referenced at the end of the presentation is actually a really important example of raising awareness of the Thames, giving people a greater opportunity to find out about the river, but also the work that Jenny Cooper's doing on the Active Thames programme is giving people the opportunity to get out and experience the river. And I don't know, Jenny, if you just wanted to say a couple of words about that.
Yep, just to touch on that, so as well as the environment grant, that you can see information about that online, we can even share in our chat. We, along with several other partners behind Active Thames, including the NGBs and Active Partnerships and Canal and River Trust, we released over £90,000 of funding in January this year. And there's some really good examples that are great community organisations introducing people to sport, often for the very first time. So that's another example of our commitment to access and inclusion there.
Thanks very much, Jenny. The next question is from David Payne about the contribution to net zero, the role that the river plays to move large bulky materials like aggregates close to market, and thus removing thousands of lorries from the road, and what more needs to be done to ensure wharf capacity is not lost to other development. I'll let Jim answer the point about wharf capacity in a minute, but I think it's important to say, David, we in moving to look as well at light freight and the potential for the river for light freight, which is a really exciting new development, we are not losing sight of the fact that there is a core role to be played as well in terms of moving bulky material. So it's not either or. I just want to make that point. And then Jim.
Thank you very much indeed, Robin. London is unique in terms of having safeguarded wharves, so having the level of protection on infrastructure that we've got for cargo handling. But I think there are two issues. Firstly, of course, there are some wharves that remain in the hands of landowners who don't want to reactivate them. And we have demonstrated, and will demonstrate again, that they will be reactivated by all the powers that we have. But there are cases, and I think you're right, David, where there are wharves that are being used but can be used more intensively. And with that, we've started conversations with operators, and we'll seek to do more, that we can encourage either greater use from the water from them, or to have complementary cargoes handled alongside. Because clearly what we've got here is a rare pieces of infrastructure on the river, and they need to be used and used thoroughly, as you say, in order to contribute to aims for net zero and the planning aims of the Mayor. So we're seeking to do more, and clearly in combination with the members of the Mineral Products Association, a number of whom have wharves.
Thanks very much, Jim. The next question, or two questions from Keith Grimley, are interesting, and I think these are both in the category of good idea, we might need to take this away and think about more. So the first one is, do we have a bid team where we work in partnership with community and stakeholders to secure external funding? Not across every issue, but maybe Jenny can just say something about the work we've done on Active Thames, which is very much that model, isn't it, in terms of pulling people together. The second is a platform for sharing innovation challenges, or data sharing, which some ports have developed. And you mentioned Tees Valley. I wasn't aware of that one, but I know that Port of Tyne has something a little bit like this. And I might ask Stephen to say something about that, since Stephen joined from the Port of Tyne last year. But we don't have either of those in quite the way you're describing, but these are good points for the consultation. So Jenny, just on the bid point.
We don't have a dedicated bid team as such, but we have worked in partnership with, for example, with sport. We've secured funding from externals, which is fantastic, not just to be able to leverage more funding for the community, but it really does show that commitment and collaborative approach. We will look to do more of that, particularly now, as you can see online, things are starting to get back to normal and not just tackling COVID. If anybody does work in bid writing, they'll have seen that everything very quickly switched across to tackle COVID, and it looks like it's moving back again. So an option for us there.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yeah, just building what's been said before, we don't have a single entity across the organisation that focuses on innovation in the way that some other organisations have. And that's not to say it isn't a focus area for it. We just do it in a sort of proportionate way as and when required. And the example of what we've done in the recent past was a study into a potential zero emission berth. And I guess a lot of the people on the call will be aware about the push towards shore power and where the UK and I guess the PLA goes in terms of that. So that was an interesting piece of work where we tried to partner with other organisations to find solutions, innovative solutions, I guess, to shore power for vessels alongside our cruise moorings. So that there's been 3 or 4 pieces of work have fallen out of that and are sort of in the development phase at present.
I think, Robin, if I could just add to that, there is the Maritime Hydrogen Highway project as well, where we led a consortium of 8 other organisations to secure funding from government, which part funds work that we're doing, looking at an array of aspects of hydrogen use, including the safety aspect and the installation of a hydrogen fuel cell at Denton. But Stephen may want to say a little bit more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Yeah, a really interesting project, Hydrogen Highway, and as Alistair said, it's a consortium effort, a number of different work packages, one of which is the installation of a hydrogen fuel cell down at our Denton site. But the overarching sort of principle behind the whole project is what would offshore generation of green hydrogen from renewable energy look like, and then modelling bringing that into central London for use within the transport network on autonomous vessels. So a real sort of good example of innovation and collaboration within the wider maritime community.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, I think just to finish off on that point, I think it's a very interesting issue about sort of bid writing, because it is a knack to it. And I think part of what you're getting at is that how do you make sure you've got good organizational learning so that you can apply successfully for grants of one sort or another? And I think some people do that by having a single central team. I think we try to do that by talking across the organization, but the general point is a really good one, because there is a knack to it. The next question is a sort of broader one from Paul Lorenzato, which is how are we going to strike the balance between increasing commercial usage and recreational usage of the river? I mean, I suppose the simple answer to that question, Paul, is that that's kind of what the BLA sort of is here for, in a sense. One of the things we have to do all the time is to look at river usage and proposed new projects and developments in the river, and make sure that competing river uses are fully examined and looked at. Now, of course, the balance is different in different parts of the river. If we take the area above Putney, on the whole, the river usage above Putney is almost exclusively for recreational use. If we take the area around Tilbury, Gravesend, it's almost exclusively commercial. So different parts of the river are different, but our job in appraising proposals is very much to look at making sure that we can accommodate safely different river users. I don't know if, Jim, you want to say a bit more about that. I mean, that's what you do, isn't it, really? And maybe I could ask Catherine Spain to say something from a harbour master's point of view as well on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ron. I'm not sure how much there is to add. Clearly, as you say, in a sort of a planning role, it's actually to look at where there have been issues, and there have been issues in Gravesend that we're dealing with in terms of development next to the river and its impact on river uses. So it's not strictly an issue of just river uses competing with each other. It's what happens on the banks and how that's dealt with. So it's clearly considering what we've got, what's going to happen, and in certain areas, again, looking at mitigations. But I think you're right, and I think Catherine's best placed in terms of what the potential options are and the mitigations we've got.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it essentially comes down to risk assessing everything, which is what the harbour masters do on a daily basis, really, and certainly with projects such as the Barking development, right from the very early stages, we were involved in working with the developers on looking at where the options were and where the potential was for having light freight and for having recreational use, and it's considered in any new developments, and how we do that safely. And sometimes the options may not be the safest, and where we can't accommodate something, we will look at all the alternative options and to see whether there's anywhere else that we can make things happen if it can't be done in a particular place. But yeah, it's a continuous consideration for any new project.
Thanks, Catherine. I think there's a question just come up actually, which is just on the same sort of themes. I'll just sort of add one point to this. So Graham Humphreys asked, whilst the vision is commendable, it will ultimately make the river more busier and therefore more regular contact between leisure and commercial. What additional safety measures are being looked at? So same kind of question, I think. I mean, I think one point on that would be to go back to our marine centre, which we're looking at, which is about installing the latest in terms of sort of safety technology for VTS. So that's a good example of where investing in the latest safety technology will help us to provide the best possible VTS system. But of course, it's not just about VTS. River safety is a whole lot more than that, and making sure that there's good training and that those who are out on the river are continue to keep their skills fresh is another aspect of it. And we've been working on a CPD, continuous professional development program with the Thames Skills Academy and the Company of Waterman Lighterman to make sure we've got that sort of CPD ethos on the river. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can do to continue to improve safety and to work on safety. But the premise of the question is right, that of course, as the river gets busier, the more important that is to keep all those things front and centre of attention. Yeah, just going back, sorry, go on, Catherine. Yeah.
I think that that it's part of Jenny's role as well with the recreational aspects in trying to encourage recreation through sort of organised participation, where you've got safety controls in place, rather than people taking to the water kind of individually, where there may be sort of a lack of education sometimes on the dangers of the river. So there's a continuous piece again around safety education that we're trying to develop.
Thanks, Catherine. Tim Beckett's asked a question. Can we update on the progress towards the PLA getting delegated powers to grant MMO marine licenses? I'm going to pass that to Jim.
That remains our long-term ambition, Tim. Clearly, we made our application. That has been held up due to Brexit and other issues in government. But clearly for us to achieve the aims of the Thames Vision, we need to have the most appropriate context for decision making to actually make development happen, the right development happen on the river. So it's something that we're still looking to progress at the speed that we can progress it.
Thanks, Jim. Sorry, the next question is from Andy Triggs-Hodge. Thanks, Andy. So we're working with London Youth Rowing. We get hundreds of young people onto the waterways around London every year. Safety is paramount and achievable. Is there a PLA strategy to create or improve access to the river for more Londoners, especially as providers like Shadwell, Ahoy, London Youth Rowing and others increase their capability? I think, Jenny, that might be one for you.
Definitely one for me. Thanks, Robin. Thanks for the question, Andy. We absolutely will be supporting the excellent outreach organisations such as LYR, Shadwell and Ahoy that you've mentioned there. Examples of best practice, brilliant programmes working with disadvantaged communities, getting them active on the water. I think there's a lot to do around clubs. We have our recent sports survey conducted last summer shows us that clubs are keen to do more, but perhaps partly because they're mostly volunteers, don't necessarily have the skill set or the confidence to work with those groups. So perhaps there's a real bridge to make between the excellent outreach that goes on and our clubs where people can join and keep active as adults as well. And then also I think in terms of back to Destination Thames events, the river is a fantastic attraction. There's more we can do there. And I know our Harbour Master team work closely with the organisations you've mentioned to make sure that where we are doing events, fundraisers, anything that draws attention to sport on the river, make sure that that's a safe process and that we maximise attention on that. We've got such an amazing blue space. Yet that's not as common a phrase as you'll hear when it comes to green space, for example. So we're pushing the blue space agenda.
Thanks, Jenny. The next question is quite specific about a proposed new pier from Fulham. So does the vision include yet more encroachment into the river? This is Chris Ingham, I should say, asking, into the, does the proposed planning application for a pier extending out into the river from Fulham football ground represent a huge safety hazard for other river users? And for clarification, how many metres out into the river is this extending? Well, it's a proposal, I think. So, but Jim.
Yeah, thanks for that. There is no application yet for this scheme. The applicants are aware of the PLA's position, which is clearly that the proposal, in whichever form ultimately it's submitted, if it is submitted, cannot prejudice navigational safety, and that we would expect any proposal to come forward to have been discussed fully with local river users. And I think then this actually comes back to the issue of this, how one uses the river and how development happens and must happen, in our point of view, in the context of safety and appropriateness. So I think there's a specific question, which is there is no application at the moment and pre-application discussions are continuing. But I think it sort of sums up the issue of riparian development and how we accommodate that within the context of a growing but safe river.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, there's one more question at the moment on the Q&A, which is from Diana McCann, which is about the natural Thames element, which you say is very encouraging. Thank you for that. regarding the commitment to improve air quality, last week the government voted to ignore the WHO lowered safe limits for air pollutants with, for example, in relation to PM10 to 10 nanograms instead of the WHO limit of 5 nanograms. So what is our position on this? I suspect the truth is we don't have a position on this. Actually, the air quality plan set out our proposals based upon the then extant legal obligation or legal limits, and I suspect that we haven't yet taken a view on last week, but I think we obviously will need to by the time we come to the final version. I don't think, has anybody got anything to add on that? I doubt we've had a chance to sort of look into that in detail. What I would say to you, Diana, is that we don't. In some cases, we do go beyond the existing. Sometimes we do go beyond the existing sort of legal minimum. So we will look at the evidence before we reach that decision. But sorry, Veronica, did you?
Yes, just quickly add on that. For our air quality strategies, we set targets to reduce the emissions from the river. So obviously when you talk about concentration and legal limits, that will be the river emissions on top of the background levels in London, which some of it, obviously majority of it will be from other emission source rather than the river. So I think we as an organisation we're try our best to reduce our emissions. That's some of the things that we said earlier, investing on different technologies that will reduce the carbon emissions, but carbon emissions and air emissions always go hand in hand. So hopefully by investing in those technologies and trying them out would help with our air emissions as well.
Thanks very much, Veronica. Thank you. Another question actually on the environment from Matthew Frith. How do we see the PLA implementing new duties in the Environment Act, e.g. targets for water and biodiversity, biodiversity net gain, enhanced biodiversity duty for public bodies, and engagement with nature recovery strategies? So I mean, generally, the broad answer I think on this is that we see this as a huge opportunity for the river, because there are so many high quality habitats in the Thames estuary which could be further enhanced through some of those powers in the Environment Act, that we're looking at those as potential opportunities. But Veronica, do you want to add to that, or Jim?
I'll just go on biodiversity net gain, because clearly that is based around the Town and Country Planning Act legislation. It's something that, as Robin says, we're actively looking at the moment, principally in relation to the proposals for either development adjacent to the river or between the river's edge and low water, and what that can mean to improving the habitat of the foreshore and other areas of the river. So how we can encompass the emerging proposals to actually benefit the river and the environment, and then by implication the vision itself. They are somewhat complicated, as planning tends to be when it meets DEFRA, but it's because the consultation, as I'm sure Matthew's aware, consultation on at the moment, we'll be responding to that and looking as to how we can react in our role as licensing authority for the river to interact with the planning authorities and improve habitats and biodiversity.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, and I think in relation to the nature recovery strategies point of the question, this is something which we've certainly engaged with, working with other partners like the RSPB and the wildlife trusts and local authorities to look at how we can better join up some of the protected areas and invest in those. In fact, we very directly supported the RSPB with a grant last year or the year before of £150,000 to improve some of the South Essex sites as part of that sort of nature recovery network. So it's something which we're very much sort of see ourselves as a partner in, albeit often working with other organisations. A question is coming from Dido Barclay. Hi, Dido. So the PLA are excellent at dealing with trading and commercial traffic on the Thames. However, there's a large blank when it comes to non-commercial river transport and private boats. The Thames is a navigational highway for the general public. I think the question is, as also, what are we doing in relation to access and facilities and landing points to maximise the next generation's personal use of the river for travel, not just leisure? We need an inventory of all facilities on the river in order to expand private and personal use for travel. I might ask, is that a Jim question? I think it might be.
I think it is. Thanks, Dido, for that. And actually, it's something that we are looking at now. I was alerted to a question from Peter Finch from the River Thames Society, who had looked on our website for visitor moorings and was disappointed there were so few. And when I looked at it, I was disappointed too, because it doesn't actually reflect the current situation. So what we're doing now is an exercise internally with our department in terms, again, of statutory consenting, with Catherine's team from Harbour Masters and Ali's team for the vision. Firstly, to actually see where we've got visitor moorings and appropriate access to the river to ensure that they are properly publicised, because when they're provided, we want to see them used. And also then to expand that, to actually start thinking in the context of the vision. As you say, Dido, where is it that people can go? And there's more people than we imagine come down from the non-tidal river or from the canal network that actually want to use the river. And we're doing our part through Tidal Thames Navigators Club, boating on the Thames website so it's safely. But clearly these people need facilities and access. So it's something that we haven't forgotten, and I don't think we want to forget. And it's work that we are looking at the moment. So it's a watch this space.
Maybe we just need to double check that we've captured that work you're already doing actually in the actions in the vision, the final vision document. Maybe we need to make it a bit more prominent. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Jim, for that. That takes us through all the questions that have come up. I'm going to wait a minute whilst, in case anybody's sort of tapping away now, thinking they've kind of missed their opportunity to ask a question.
Just while we're pausing, Jim, you go ahead first.
Well, if I could just add something else, and I've actually, whilst thinking on this, and you're right, Robin, actually, that's something to encompass in this document. I think something else is that we're working at the moment on tree management, a long-term tree management plan with Richmond, and proposed within that. And I've just sent a note to Ali, that's something as well that I think we need to encompass within the Thames Vision as well. Again, it's a long-term strategy with the aim of improving habitat, amenity, views, whilst ensuring that through a sensitive tree work we can maintain navigational safety. So it seems in a small way, in a small piece of West London towpath, to encapsulate a number of the aims of the vision. So what we're doing there, we're looking to, I think, encompass within the final version of the plan, perhaps as a way that we're doing work that can actually be shown to be in parallel with the vision itself.
And just before I come to Alistair, Jim, I think there's a follow-up question from Jeff Hetherington to Dido's question, which is essentially, what about this sort of public access point? So if I buy a sailing boat, rib or dinghy, where can I launch it? How do I find out where I can launch it without joining a yacht club? For example, there are consultations on the Silvertown round to Beckton Riverside at the moment. Is the PLA, for instance, making submissions to seek the provision of free public slipways?
We are, sorry, is that, I think that's,
yes, please, yeah.
Me again. Well, we're certainly we've certainly responded to the OAPF with the GLA. I thought, obviously, we've done a lot of work previously in terms of slipways and public access points. I think we'll need to look at that again, certainly in terms of slipways, because there's a particularly fine one in Newham that is available for use. And I think we'll have to have a look at that again, and also to ensure that access remains unfettered, because certainly I'm aware of some that there was access and then people tended to put gates across them. So I think that is something, again, we'll make a note to follow up, because a lot of the information we've got, I think it's just how it's disseminated.
Yeah, so maybe slipways could be on the map as well. Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Alistair, did you want to?
Yeah, sorry, just just making a note of slipways. Right, yes. Just so it was just really. I don't know whether we have reached the end of the questions, but
well, just to say, there's two. I think the two more points. I think there are more comments actually. Diana McCann's come back saying on the air pollution issue that the positioning of air quality monitoring points is very important in order to distinguish between land and river-based emissions. We agree. And that's very much the sort of work that Veronica and the team are looking at. Where to position monitoring points. Diana, thank you for your appreciation of our response on trees and towpath. There is one further question just come in from Keith Grimley. A Kent project looking at shared use of workspaces to maximise flexible working for local authority and other staff. Would you be interested to know more about this? Yes, please. Yeah. Sounds good. About joint working, how do we sort of work more jointly? I think absolutely, because I think the more we can kind of get better at this, the more we make best use of all our efforts. So do send that through to Alistair. Keith, thank you.
Yeah, I actually, that's a really timely point to hand over. Actually, I can't remember which European port it is. Maybe it's Rotterdam. They've actually specifically created, they've turned an existing building into a collaboration space for small innovation or innovative businesses in the marine area, and they found it a really helpful way of driving that innovation because it gives a bit of momentum and power of the group, if you like. I just really wanted to say it's been really great to see so many people online and interested in the vision, and just say please do follow up and submit a response to the consultation. In particular, tell us what actions you'd either like to see or take on individually, or join us in work on in partnership on, because really the scale of the ambition here is such that we need everybody to come on board and contribute.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alistair. And I think all it remains for me to do then is to thank everybody for joining, for all of your questions. The questions are always the best bit of any meeting because it's where you kind of bring to life some of the issues. And thank you very much to the panelists and colleagues around the PLA for answering some of those. And as Alistair says, this is very much the not the only opportunity for you to input into this process. There are the public meetings, and of course, please do send your thoughts and questions and ideas and responses into the consultation exercise. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll sign off at this point. Thank you. Bye.